Good Wednesday evening, everybody. Rob O'Connor here from RobVenoSports.com, along with Rob Veno, and it is time for us to do our Week 5 early look. We'll take a look at some of the biggest games of the upcoming weekend, but before we can do that, we need to take a look back at what happened during a very interesting Week 4 of the college football season, and to do all of that, I need to bring in Rob Veno, founder of RobVenoSports.com. Rob, how are you this evening?
I'm doing good, buddy. How about yourself?
Doing very well. We got a lot to talk about. Let's jump right into it. If you would have told me that Tennessee would have beaten Florida by 10 points, probably would have believed you. If you would have told me they would have done it after being 3 touchdowns, I probably would not have. We'll start right with that and the amazing comeback by Tennessee on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, that was I guess you could call it a season saver for Tennessee. Florida, like you say, gets out to that 21-3 lead. Tennessee comes back with 35 unanswered, and then Florida tries to chase from there. Boy, nobody had exposed the Florida defense in the way that Tennessee did in that game, and maybe that's the one that gets them untracked, Rob, because that's the team that everybody expected to see this year, at least from an offensive standpoint. We expected Josh Dobbs and Jalen Hurd and that offense to be explosive. They showed up. It took an awful long time this season for them to show up, but they did. And now we'll see from here. If that does unlock the key to an offense that can outscore even elite defensive teams. I think they did a good job defensively against Florida as well. I don't think you can't be completely negative on Florida either, because I thought Austin Appleby played very well. There was a lot of concern with Luke Del Rio out as quarterback for Florida because of injury, that maybe Austin Appleby, a graduate transfer from Purdue, couldn't get the job done, but he definitely played pretty well. Certainly as good as could be expected in that spot. So I don't think all is doom and gloom for Florida either, but they're going to kick themselves, obviously, for letting that one get away, because with that defense and an 18-point lead, it's probably one that they should have put away.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Tennessee, I really think that they actually needed the game a lot more than Florida did, because they have a brutal stretch of games coming up. If you look at, they're going to Georgia this week. We'll talk about that one a little bit later. But then their crossover games this year are brutal. They're against what's looking to be the top 2 teams in the SEC West at this point, in Texas A&M and Alabama. A&M on the road, Bama at home. Neither of those games are going to be easy by any stretch, and I think if they would have lost that, they probably would have put themselves too far behind Florida to realistically have a shot to win the East this year.
Yeah, there's no doubt. That's what you're after in the SEC. You're after a divisional championship and a chance to get into the SEC conference championship. So for Tennessee, it was a huge win. Like you say, there's difficult games on the horizon, especially non-division, the Georgia game coming up. And I guess when you look at the East, the sleeper, so to speak, would be Missouri, the way they're playing right now. I don't think anybody can just X that one on the schedule as a W. So that'll be a difficult game for Tennessee as well. But that was a big win. At Florida, like you just said, if they had gotten off to a 2-0 start and Tennessee wound up with the 0-1, would have been a totally different story. And again, Florida's going to kick themselves for letting that one get away, because head coach McElwain's team could have put themselves in a real good position in the East.
They absolutely could have, but they let it fall apart there in the second half. I think the other big surprise of the weekend is not necessarily that Wisconsin beat Michigan State, although that was a surprise. The spread really wasn't that big, which I thought was a little telling unto itself, but the way Wisconsin beat Michigan State is very surprising. Last-second field goal could have bought that in a close game, with Michigan State maybe making a lot of mistakes, some turnovers, but the way that they played. Hollybrook looked really good. And I just think that was probably another very big surprise on the weekend. What are your take on that game?
Yeah, in reality, Rob, Michigan State was hardly in that ball game. Wisconsin kind of went wire to wire in that one. The defense was sound. When you look at the statistical lines, you find that Michigan State actually had more total yardage than did Wisconsin, but that certainly doesn't tell the story. Wisconsin forced 4 turnovers from Michigan State. I think Michigan State's inability to run the football, we know that they like to run the football as a power team and work off of that with play-action passing. Didn't really work. They were 27 carries for 75 yards, less than 3 per carry. Of course, in college, they take sack yardage out of your rushing yardage. So if you want to put the sack yardage back in, then they're 23 carries for 95 yards. Still not what you would expect from a Michigan State ground game. They were beaten at the line of scrimmage, and this is the second time this year that Wisconsin, as underdogs, has come up with a huge win. The LSU game opening day or opening week, and now this Michigan State game. The Wisconsin schedule, I think you and I talked about how brutal it's going to be this year. You talk about crossover games. They play everybody under the sun in a huge, 4 or 5 week stretch of games. So that win, very important for the Wisconsin Badgers. Like the way Alex Hornibrook played as starting quarterback. As I mentioned last week, he's a cool kid and there's not a lot that's going to rattle him. I think Wisconsin has found their starting quarterback. But again, for Wisconsin, it's more or less a situation where they're going to have to play that way every single week. Same effort, same focus, same execution, week in and week out in order to run this gauntlet that they're going to be involved in. For Michigan State, perhaps a little bit of a letdown after the Notre Dame game, but 30-6, like you say, a little bit surprising that Wisconsin beat them that soundly. Again, statistical line doesn't really show it, but all the intangibles went Wisconsin's way in that contest, and they made a lot of it. They made a lot of it happen for themselves. It wasn't necessarily Michigan State killing themselves in that contest. Wisconsin was responsible for a lot of what happened in that game.
I couldn't agree more. They looked really good. Very solid team. Definitely exceeding the expectations that were set for them by the media and the pollsters at the beginning of the season. And it leads us into the next point. Les Miles out at LSU after 4 games and a 2-2 start. One of those losses coming to Wisconsin 16-14, and what really was a road game for LSU, going up to Lambeau and losing their interception last minute as they're driving in for a field goal. Then this past week they go to Auburn. They don't look great offensively. They've made the change at quarterback. The offense clearly still having some issues. Last second of the game, touchdown to the back of the end zone. However, LSU, after the clock was stopped, and they knew the clock was going to wind on the whistle, and they were lined up, still could not get a snap off. The snap came late. They reviewed the play. They took away the touchdown instead of a 1-point victory for LSU. Auburn wins by 5. Did LSU make the right decision from an administration standpoint in terms of firing Les Miles? And more importantly, if Auburn loses that game without scoring a touchdown, is Gus Malzahn on the hot seat at Auburn?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rob, because we'll never know. I think the difference between the two head coaches is the fact that LSU actually tried to get rid of Les Miles last year and failed, and then had to kind of eat crow and proclaim him as their head coach going forward. We all remember that awkward interview after the bowl win last season by LSU. It's another reprieve. Their schedule is so interesting, the way this whole thing went down for them, because in the Mississippi State, they lose the Wisconsin game, and at that point, I think the rumbling started again that maybe they wanted to fire Les Miles. Come back, not very impressive over Jacksonville State, but it's an FCS team, and a lot of times teams don't go all out in those types of games. But the Mississippi State game was really a dominant win for LSU that was made close by their disinterest at the end of the game. They're 23-7 ahead with basically 4.5 left in the game. They give up a touchdown to Mississippi State, a long drive and a touchdown, and then they can't recover an onside kick, and they let Mississippi State go right back down the field again and make that thing 23-21. And the final score just doesn't look impressive enough for LSU alumni, fan base, media, and then to come back and lose this one to Auburn. A victory probably wouldn't be talking about Les Miles being fired, but it didn't work out that way. Defense was, real good at keeping Auburn out of the end zone, but again, we have to take it all with a grain of salt because to this point in time, LSU hasn't faced a tremendous offense. I mean, we talked about Wisconsin and how good they played against Michigan State, but once again, they were outgained by Michigan State. It's not a great offense to play. Jacksonville State's a very good FCS offense. Mississippi State, I don't think that Dan Mullen's team is in the class offensively that they were in last year with Dak Prescott. And then, of course, Auburn, we know, has struggled all season long to put any points on the board. 6 scores in that game, all 6 field goals. Some credit to LSU's defense. Something has to be heaped on the ineffectiveness of the Auburn offense to get in the end zone. So the schedule wasn't really that demanding. I guess, if you're looking for a way to fire a guy, they found their way. They fired him. They bring in Ed Orgeron. Everybody loves Ed Orgeron, right? He's a recruiter deluxe. Players love him. It seems like every 3 years Ed Orgeron's an interim head coach somewhere. He's a Louisiana native, which obviously helps. We'll see how he does. But it's interesting to me, Rob, to find out after the fact that, we knew not only did Les Miles go, but Cam Cameron was let go as well. And it's just interesting to find out after the fact that Cam Cameron was still there as the offensive coordinator until Orgeron became the head coach, and his first order of business was to fire Cam Cameron. To me, if we're looking ahead, which we do in this handicapping gambling business, betting these college football games, you have to be a little bit proactive. And to me, that firing says Ed Orgeron's sick of the prehistoric style offense, and they're going to try something different. Steve Ensminger, the tight ends coach, is your new offensive coordinator here. I wouldn't be surprised to see LSU, obviously not an entirely new playbook right off the bat, but we're going to see them against Missouri. I think that they're going to try and be a little more wide open on the offensive side of the football. Certainly they've got the talent to do so. We'll see if they can make it work. It's an awful short time period to throw new stuff at these kids. But again, with the athletes they have, a lot of times simple stuff can go a long way for a touchdown. So we'll see. But interesting fire. I think LSU wanted to get rid of him. They finally did, and now we'll see what Orgeron and Ensminger put together, because it's not the defense that everybody's worried about. It's definitely that offense.
I think one of the biggest reasons that they pulled the trigger now is they did not want to even give Les Miles the opportunity to right the ship this season, maybe beat Nick Saban, beat Alabama for the first time in a long time. I think since 2011 it would be their first win against Alabama. And maybe he does something like that, and they don't drop any other games. They finish out 10-2, and then they can't get rid of him at the end of the year. I think they've had it out for him for at least the past 2 seasons, and the fact that they couldn't do it last year, I don't think they wanted to give him another opportunity to save his job again, and that's why they pulled the trigger mid-season. I don't think in any way, shape, or form it was in the best interest of the program to do it now. You don't have coaches looking to leave now. Jimbo Fisher's not looking to get out of Florida State now. Any other top candidate they'd be looking to get is not even interested in interviewing right now. And I think LSU knew that but just didn't care because they wanted him gone before he could do anything to keep himself around any longer.
And, there's some interesting names being floated out there at this point in time, and I think you'll probably see the list increase. And obviously, like you say, it's going to be a season's end, off-season decision who they hire. But they're going to go in the style of the wide-open offensive coach, and right away we see Dana Holgorsen's name mentioned. Dana Holgorsen heading into the season on the hot seat at West Virginia. We'll see how they perform. Right now they're an undefeated football team, but Holgorsen has had his issues in Morgantown. I think Larry Fedora at North Carolina, who was the head coach at Southern Mississippi before he went to North Carolina. We haven't seen Fedora's name mentioned, but I do believe we'll probably see that. You have to have somebody with name recognition, I think, in this job. I think that's what they'll be looking for. However, if they weren't, I would almost make the trip to Boise State and interview somebody like Blake Anderson, who was the head coach at Arkansas State, now at Boise. Is certainly a guy who is known for a wide-open offense. So one of those types of guys is going to get this job. I don't think it's going to be somebody stagnant. I know there's a lot of talk about Lane Kiffin. I don't think that's the answer, and I don't know that that's the way LSU will go. But I would keep my eye on guys like Dana Holgorsen and also Larry Fedora out of UNC. I think both of those guys would make the jump from their respective schools to go coach at LSU. And how does Dave Aranda feel at this point in time? Gets hired as a defensive coordinator, comes down, left a real good job at Wisconsin, and 4 games in, he's in the middle of all this mess. Not good for Coach Aranda at this point in time, probably wishing that he was still at Wisconsin.
What do you think about the name Tom Herman? I know he's done a lot of really good things at Houston. He's trying to get them into the playoff this season, and his name's been thrown out and about a little bit. Any chance of him being the next coach?
Oh, I think they'll go very hard after Tom Herman. They'll be in competition with other teams. It's interesting, Rob, that Tom Herman decided to come back this year, because Tom Herman could have gone other places this season. But we know that there's going to be job openings that will be attractive. I know that USC will likely come open. It's going to depend on where Tom Herman wants to go, who throws the most money at him, where he feels most comfortable. I'm not sure. He showed an awful lot of loyalty to Houston heading into this season by staying, and you never know what's inside a guy's mind. But should Houston be one of the selected teams into the Big 12, does he want to be the guy that actually puts Houston back on the map and stay there and build a potential Power 5 perennial top 10 team? He's certainly on the right track for doing that. So it'll be interesting what Tom Herman thinks too, but you could expect LSU to go after him real hard, along with some of the names I mentioned. And I'm sure there's a few more that are going to come out as time goes on. I was just reading an article today where Oklahoma State head coach Mike Gundy is having problems with their biggest booster, T. Boone Pickens, who the stadium's named after. It would be interesting if Mike Gundy didn't survive the season at Oklahoma State. Would he be a name considered by LSU? So we've got a lot of time before the decision is going to be made. Ed Orgeron is the head coach for the remainder of this season. You can be pretty sure of that. But when the time comes, there'll be a lot of names in that hat. And LSU certainly is at the forefront to get any head coach that they want to come coach their program.
Well, Rob, you say that, and I agree with you right now. I think the one wild card in this would be if the Texas head coaching position comes open at the end of the season, which I still think there's a possibility of that. Then you've got 2 traditional powerhouse programs and very rich recruiting areas looking for head coaches, and then LSU might not be the number one on some of these guys' lists.
Yeah, can you imagine if the head coach openings were LSU, Texas, USC? These are fantastic historical programs where almost any head coach would love to be. Obviously, California, talent-rich, and now that now that USC is rid of all the sanctions, I think that any coach that is at the top of his game right now, would love to be the one that goes in there and reestablishes USC to basically the times of when Pete Carroll was there and USC was on top. So you've got huge programs with huge reputations, and likely all 3 could be needing a head coach. And I would add a fourth to this, Rob, because we saw, if we stick on the basis of coach firings over the course of this last weekend, Brian Van Gorder for Notre Dame, the defensive coordinator, in my mind, I think was made kind of a scapegoat. But if Notre Dame fails the rest of this season, and let's just say they end at maybe 7-5, it's a very disappointing season for them, I could almost see Brian Kelly being given a pink slip at Notre Dame as well. I don't think Van Gorder was the problem there. Obviously, the personnel or lack thereof on the defensive side of the football due to injuries, due to suspensions, due to all kinds of things has hindered what he's been able to do at Notre Dame. But Brian Kelly's had an awful long time there to reestablish Notre Dame, and for the most part has not done so. So we may see Notre Dame in that mix as well. The rest of their season will determine how safe Brian Kelly is. But I wouldn't put it past Notre Dame if the season doesn't go their way to unload him as well.
You could be very right about that one as well. Notre Dame losing to Duke on Saturday afternoon. Any excuse for that at all? At home, no less?
There shouldn't be, right? I mean, there really shouldn't be. Duke lost to Wake Forest the week before. Duke's playing with a backup quarterback. Notre Dame, if we go through the recruiting ratings over the last 5 seasons, Brian Kelly's Notre Dame team keeps showing up as one of the top recruiting teams in the nation, and yet we don't see Notre Dame playing for anything meaningful at the end of the season. So there were a lot of expectations for this team this year, and the season has not gotten off to a real good start for them. You can begin with the game against Texas opening day where they lost, and you go now to Duke, and we know that Notre Dame plays a rugged schedule every year. There's probably more losses on the horizon for this team. I don't know that offense is good enough, and it's a really good offense, but I don't know if it's good enough to overcome the shortcomings on that defense, Rob. They give up so many points and so many chunk plays. It's so easy to score against them. Duke showed it last week. Once again, Texas put up 50. Duke goes for over 40. It's hard for offenses to outscore teams when they're putting up that many points. It's a difficult situation, I think, right now, and a tenuous situation for head coach Kelly to try and rewrite the ship. And once again, I think the firing of Van Gorder was just, a scapegoat kind of firing. Hey, the defense is our problem. We'll get rid of this guy and we'll be okay. I just don't know that that's the case here.
Well, Rob, I think we've said a lot about coaching situations and about what we saw last week. Let's shift gears and get into some of the bigger games of this weekend. And we don't even actually have to wait for the weekend to get one of the biggest games of the weekend. Friday night, 9 o'clock on the East. Washington will host Stanford in a battle of undefeated Pac-12 teams. Stanford didn't look phenomenal against UCLA last weekend, and I think the final score, 22-13, is a little misleading. They had a strip sack as UCLA was going for a Hail Mary at the end of the game, and they ran that back in for 6 to inflate the final score a little bit. But Stanford had done nothing on offense until they got the ball for what was their final offensive possession of the game, and then they just found something that worked, and they put it into another gear, and they managed to drive down the field. The drive started with a really boneheaded penalty by UCLA that took them from the 15 to the 30 on catch interference, and then from there, Stanford took advantage of the field position, went down the field and got the score. Washington coming in off of a road overtime win in Arizona, 35-28, setting up this big battle in the Pacific Northwest on Saturday night. What do you see in this one, Rob?
Yeah, the Washington game, unimpressive as well, right? It's a team that fails to cover. They were 10, 11-point favorites in that game. Anu Solomon, the starting quarterback, not involved in that one because of injury. Nick Wilson, the top running back for Arizona, not involved in that game, yet Arizona somehow, some way finds a way to drag Washington into overtime. I think there's a lot of questions. While the bandwagon has rolled at, beyond the speed limit since the beginning of the year, Chris Peterson's team, I think, is in for their first real test. Just check the opponents that they've played. Rutgers, Idaho, Portland State, their first three. Of course, they demolished all three, but who cares? And then when they get faced with a conference road game, they barely escape 35-28, and that opponent, as I mentioned, is missing probably two of their best offensive weapons. So I think there's questions to be answered about Washington here as well. Stanford, meanwhile, has been through a little more rigorous test. Obviously, they've played Kansas State, USC, and UCLA. The strength of schedule for the opposition, it's not even close. Stanford's schedule has been miles upon miles tougher than Washington's has. I will say this. I believe, and I'm getting all of my podcasts and shows mixed up here, Rob, but I do believe that last week you and I talked about the Stanford-UCLA game, and I thought that the biggest difference between USC, who Stanford had played the week before, and UCLA, their opponent last week, was the physical toughness on both sides of the line of scrimmage. UCLA made me look good in that respect because they showed extreme toughness in the trenches. They battled Stanford, one of your more physical teams in the nation, year in and year out. Jim Mora's got a tough team at UCLA, and it showed. They're winning, as you mentioned, 13-9 with, I think it was, less than 2.5 left in the game. Stanford winds up scoring 13 points in the last 2.5 minutes. So now they're going to play Washington, who, again, Chris Peterson's got a pretty physical football team. Stanford's going to be on the road. It's a difficult venue in Seattle, always has been. The fans can be extremely wild up there, especially when their team is good. So it's a test for Stanford, and Stanford's going to go at this in this particular game without one of their starting wide receivers, Francis Owusu, out of the game because of concussion. So they're even down one offensive weapon. The money has moved towards Washington in this game. Game open, Washington a 3-point favorite. Now Washington's up to 3.5. Again, I've said this since week one. I'll say it again. I think Stanford's extremely underrated by the odds makers, by the public. All they continue to do is cover spreads. Power ratings say that they should have been power ratings suggest they should be a 0.5 point favorite. Instead, they're getting 3.5. There's a 4.5 point gap there. This will be an interesting game. I'm a little hesitant because we don't know the real Washington yet. But if you were just to base things off of who they've played to this point and what the results were to this point, you'd have to give the edge to the Stanford Cardinal for sure because Kansas State, USC, and UCLA is a heck of a lot tougher than anything Washington's played to this point in time.
Absolutely. Not an overly challenging schedule for Washington. And I do think while the result for Washington was a win last weekend, they didn't look great in doing it. There may have been a little bit of a look-ahead factor to their matchup on Friday night with Stanford. Moving along to another matchup between two top 10 programs, we've got Wisconsin, second straight game on the road, playing another Michigan school, this time University of Michigan, and they are getting about 10.5 points in this one. How do you see it playing out? Does Wisconsin have another big upset in the bag for them, or is this when they finally show some of the areas of concern that we've had about them, and maybe Michigan's probably a little bit better of a team than Michigan State, going to be a little tough to do this on back-to-back weeks? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's the best point of all, Rob. It goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the show here that, Wisconsin's schedule is so challenging. Their next 5 games. Now, they do get a bye week thrown in after this contest against Michigan, a little bit of a breather. And when they come out of the bye, they're going to be faced first with Ohio State, Iowa, and Nebraska, 3 more tough games in a row. What we saw out of them last week, they'll have to do repeatedly week in and week out. And I will say this, that, Wisconsin, as far as if we took a general look across the entire college football nation, Wisconsin is about as steady a team as you can find out there. You usually know what you're going to get from this team. You don't get massive swings one way or the other. So you're going to get a good defensive effort every time. The biggest question for them becomes, will they have enough offense against Jim Harbaugh's Michigan defense? And I'm not so sure. And I think another reason why they might not is that Michigan is probably better equipped to control the football and keep Wisconsin's defense on the field than Michigan State's was. We talked earlier about how Michigan State could not run the football whatsoever. Michigan will probably be able to run the football a little bit better than that and hang on to the football. I've liked Michigan, and that's not going out on a limb because the whole college football world, like Michigan heading into this season, thought that they would be a prime candidate for one of those Final Four slots. They're certainly proving it at this point in time. I would worry about Alex Hornibrook in this setting. To do it back-to-back on the road, Michigan State and Michigan, to me is, boy, that's asking an awful lot. I like what they did last week, but I just don't see it happening here this week. Michigan's been very good so far this season, going through all their opponents. Now, all that being said, this game opened Michigan minus 10.5, which to me was probably padded a little bit by odds makers. I think odds makers expected that Michigan money would come, so they made the spread a little bit higher. Power ratings say this one should have only been 8. So if if you believe in the power ratings, then it's about a field goal heavy to start with, and we'll see where money carries it the rest of the week. But certainly I think that odds makers were anticipating a lot of Michigan money. It's held firm at 10.5, which kind of shows you that the odds makers did their job here. The fact that it hasn't run one way or the other indicates that, you know what, whatever additional they put into the price on the favorite here, it worked real well for them because they're getting an even flow of money both ways right now.
And I do think that it will be a Michigan win. I think the spread, I kind of see it being, at least from what I'm looking at, I see this as not so much a power ratings play. I think you factor in the situation of the play, and I think Michigan might be able to take care of business a little easier than some may be thinking on Saturday. Move along to Tennessee and Georgia. We talked about Tennessee's big win against Florida, storming back from a 3-touchdown deficit to win 38-28. We didn't talk about how poorly Georgia looked against Ole Miss last week. I mean, no shame in going to Ole Miss and losing, but to lose the way Georgia lost, that was pretty embarrassing. Can they regroup and recover at home and get a huge win against Tennessee, or is Tennessee's offense going to be too much for them?
Yeah, I would think that, at least my opinion of the situation, Rob, Georgia hasn't looked good for 2 weeks in a row now. You know, they got that win over North Carolina in week 1 in the Georgia Dome somehow, some way. But they go to Missouri in their 3rd game of the season. And first of all, let's start with Nicholls State, where they win 23-21. Then they go to Missouri, and they need a 4th and 10 touchdown pass from 20 yards out near the end of the game. I think about 1:20 left. Jacob Eason completes that pass to Isaiah McKenzie. They win that game. They have to hang on for dear life because Jamon Moore fumbles at midfield as Missouri's marching down the field to maybe get a game-winning field goal. And they also needed the benefit of 5 Missouri turnovers to win a game by 1 point. So that game wasn't real impressive to me. If Missouri's learning at this point how to win football games under new head coach Barry Odom, offensive coordinator Josh Heupel has things going on offense. But if Missouri was a team that knew how to close at this point in time, Georgia wouldn't have won that game. They go to Ole Miss. I think that's a combination of things. I think that's a combination of Georgia not being as good as maybe they were predicted to be this year, and it's also Mississippi being far better and maybe underrated after losing the 2 games that they lost to Florida State and Alabama. Any team that's going to be ahead by 21 against Florida State and Alabama certainly is among the nation's elite. I know they blew both games, but still teams don't get to 21 points ahead of those two teams unless they're really good. And Mississippi, the question last week by us and by just about everybody across the country was, will Mississippi sulk or will they be PO'd and come back and whack somebody? And the answer from the opening kickoff was they were kicked off and they came out and whacked Georgia. I don't think it's a very good Georgia team. Kirby Smart's defense, he's a defensive guru, but the defense was picked apart by Mizzou. The defense was picked apart by Mississippi. And if Tennessee, if that 35 consecutive point streak that they had last week against Florida, 35 unanswered, is any indication, then maybe this offense is too powerful for Georgia as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee wins this one big, Rob. I think these are two teams heading in different directions. I think Tennessee's on the uptick now, probably optimistic. Their offensive line was challenged. They were questioned by everybody because they hadn't played good whatsoever up until that point when they started to score last week. Maybe now newfound confidence for that team. I think they're probably the right side. Power ratings, once again, the number a little bit padded. Tennessee, by power ratings suggestion, should be -1. They open here -3. But I think that's a legitimate -3. If we consider all the outside circumstances beyond the raw talent, which power ratings don't consider, then Tennessee deserves to be every bit of 3. And I don't know that a road game is going to affect them that much. Certainly these kids are not going to be in awe of going to Athens between the hedges. So I think Tennessee's probably the right side.
Moving ahead to a game, it does involve a team with 2 losses, but the reason I want to talk about it is they don't have a conference loss yet, and that's Oklahoma. They're 1-2 on the year, but they lost to Houston, and then they lost to Ohio State. So they come in at 1-2. They're playing TCU, who is 3-1, also without a conference loss. They had their loss to Arkansas in double overtime. Then they come back last week, and I think the biggest improvement was on the defensive side of the ball. SMU is not a great football team by any stretch of the imagination. They're probably not going to a bowl game this year. But if you look at SMU, they can score some points, and for TCU to hold them to 3 the entire game, I think that was a very positive step forward for that team after how they let Arkansas kind of take it to them in the back end of the fourth quarter in overtime of their meeting 2 weeks ago. Oklahoma in off of a bye week. Plenty of time to prepare for this one. What do you see happening as Oklahoma plays its first conference game of the season?
Yeah, the difference between Oklahoma and Ole Miss, who were both in the same situation, teams that came in with expectations of playing for a national championship, teams that went through their first 3 weeks and got beaten by 2 very good football teams. The difference between the two is that Oklahoma had the bye week, right? They had time to maybe gather themselves and come out and play conference football. Now, I'm always reminded, and I said this earlier in the week, I'm always reminded of Oklahoma. There was a stretch, Rob, of seasons in the earlier 2000s where Oklahoma would go to Texas and lose year in and year out. And at that point, because the Red River rivalry is played, say, 4th, 5th week of the season every year, at that point, in each of those seasons, it was like, well, Oklahoma's season is shot, lost to Texas again. And somehow, some way, Bob Stoops would always get that team up off the mat. And in multiple years after a loss to Texas, they continued on and ran the table the rest of the way and showed real well the rest of the year. So I think he's got a certain head coaching ability to get his team refocused despite the situation. I think that'll happen here. TCU, they win that game last week against SMU, and it was a big second half that did it because at halftime I think that game was 6-3 TCU. They just didn't look good offensively. If nothing else, they should look good on offense. The defensive side of the football has suffered through so many injuries, and we see so many question marks again this week for that team on the defensive side of the football. Pair of secondary members, top defensive end Josh Carraway all these guys that are banged up. Gary Patterson has commented on it the past couple of weeks. Just have to find some bodies. They did so against SMU, mainly because SMU is handicapped the last 2 weeks. Their quarterback, Matt Davis, goes down for the season 2 weeks ago. So they're playing with a backup quarterback these last couple of weeks, and certainly could not make anything happen against TCU, despite the fact that TCU was banged up on the defensive side. Oklahoma, in all likelihood, will make TCU pay for those defensive injuries. It's still a very well-balanced football team. The one thing I see in them, Rob, maybe on the offensive side, is that they don't have the one go-to wide receiver at this point like they had in Sterling Shepard. They've got a ton of talented kids on the perimeter, but Sterling Shepard was a guy who Baker Mayfield could depend on in the toughest of times to come through with the completion that they needed. All you have to do is think back to the Tennessee game last year in Knoxville where Oklahoma came from behind. Sterling Shepard put on a show. They haven't really developed that one guy yet, but other than that, the backfield is insanely good. The offensive line needs to play a little bit better. But I think I would probably defer to Bob Stoops getting this team up and ready, and all he has to do is point to what Ole Miss did last week and say, see what those guys did? That's what we need to do, refocus. I don't think TCU is much on the defensive side of the football this year. Gary Patterson is a defensive-minded coach, and it's been very difficult for him the last couple of weeks, last couple of seasons, because of all the injuries that this team has gone through. They've had to outscore people. We'll see if Kenny Hill and company can do it here, but if they get off to a slow start like they did against SMU, they could get trounced by Oklahoma in that game.
I think that they're definitely going to come to play. I think, like you said, the bye week is a big difference, and I think that this game will be the defining moment of whether or not you'll want to be betting on Oklahoma for the rest of the season or whether they're going to be a team to fade for the rest of the season. I'm probably leaning towards laying off of this one and just watching how it plays out between the two teams, see what Oklahoma team decides to show up, knowing their national title hopes are dead, but their Big 12 title hopes are alive. Is that enough? We'll find out on Saturday night, that's for sure.
Yeah,
move
absolutely.
along. Go ahead, Rob.
No, I was going to say absolutely. And again, you and I made this point last week, but let's make it one more time. This is why the Big 12 misses a conference championship team, because even a two-loss team at this point, I think that the committee could look back. If Oklahoma ran the table and then won a conference championship game, I think the committee could look back and say, well, Houston, really good, Ohio State, really good, and they would at least receive some consideration at season's end. But without that conference championship game, these Big 12 teams aren't even looked at anymore. Once they lose during the season, they're pretty much finished. We've seen it the past couple of years, and the sooner they decide to increase by two teams, get 2 16 divisions, and, create a championship game, the better off they'll be for it.
Absolutely. Moving to our final game we want to talk about in terms of the games that we had selected ahead of time, we've got a huge ACC matchup between Louisville and Clemson. Louisville going on the road. They're coming off a big win against Marshall last weekend. Really did not look ahead at all. They look absolutely phenomenal offensively. Clemson's looked good, not phenomenally great this year. They looked a lot better against Georgia Tech. They have a couple extra days to prepare for Lamar Jackson, who's accounted for 25 touchdowns in just 4 games this year. Really an astronomical number, well on his way to some serious Heisman consideration. And a win here would be a huge exclamation point on what Louisville is trying to do this year and would really put them in the driver's seat where unless they do something big and slip up against teams they have no business losing against, they're going to be the champion of their division and get to play in the ACC title game. You look at this game and you think a lot of points, more than likely total up there in the upper 60s. The line opened at Pick'em, and it's since shaded down towards Louisville, surprisingly, as the favorite now on the road by 1.5, 2 points in some spots. What do you see here, Rob?
Well, we see the love affair with Louisville, right? I mean, the money suggests that everybody at this point in time is, the general consensus is, like you said, Clemson hasn't looked good. Louisville's looked tremendously good. They passed all their tests so far, in the Florida State game being the major test. I would let's do it this way, Rob. Let's just go ahead for argument's sake and take the Clemson side for a second, the Clemson side of this contest, and list the positives that if you want to back Clemson, you might be able to cling to. I think for starters, when you look at the Clemson schedule, what opened up as being unimpressive is becoming more impressive. And by that I mean they played Auburn and Troy. And in both games they were heavily favored. And in both games much wasn't thought of either Auburn or Troy. But now that we're 4 weeks in, we know Auburn's got a tremendous defense, tremendous front seven. It's difficult to penetrate that front seven. Clemson had a tough time with it, still put up 400 yards offense, 399, win that game 19-13. Then they played Troy. Troy, although they're a Sun Belt team, up to this point they've been a buzzsaw, and they have defeated the point spread by miles thus far. If you're back in Troy, you're making a lot of money at this point in time. And if you watch the Clemson game, a lot of it is because of their defense. We know that with Neil Brown as head coach, one of those spread gurus, that Troy's going to be able to move the football. Had a lot of guys back this year. But defensively, we haven't seen them play real good defense in a few years. And against Clemson, that front seven and that secondary surprised me even in that game. They were very, very good, held Clemson to 30 points. But against that team, Clemson still got 414 yards. Now Deshaun Watson comes out before week 3. He apologizes for the poor play of the offense, which maybe you can give a little bit of praise, like I said, to the opposing defenses. They play South Carolina State. They score 59 points. Still nobody's impressed because it's South Carolina State. But last week, what we saw on Thursday night was complete demolition of Georgia Tech. In every way, shape, or form. Georgia Tech in that game, I can't remember the last time I saw Paul Johnson's team held to 2.4 yards per play on average. You need 5 plays to get a first down at that rate. They outgained them 442-124. The game's never in question. Deshaun Watson in the passing game, the last 2 weeks, is 59 of 83 for 632 yards, completing well over 70% of his passes. So I think something has clicked there in the passing game. Obviously, they should be better. They brought back all the wide receivers from last year, plus their best wide receiver, Mike Williams, who was injured all of last year. So you expected them to hit the ground running offensively. Maybe now they are. The difference between Louisville playing Florida State, and we've seen this play out now, the difference between them playing Florida State and the difference between them going to Clemson and playing Clemson now is the defense. Clemson's defense is much better than Florida State's. Florida State last week we saw South Florida had 21 points before we could blink. And then in the second half, FSU finally calmed South Florida down. But Clemson defensively has really looked good all season long. And I think that Lamar Jackson and company are in for their first real test. So if you want to back Clemson, that's really what you're looking at. You're looking at the strength of their defense. You're looking at the fact that Deshaun Watson in the passing game has really come around the last couple of weeks. You're looking at home field advantage. And if you date back to last year's game was played at Louisville. Clemson wins 20-17, but it was really defensive domination. They sacked the quarterback 5 times. They gained over 400 yards against Louisville's defense. I think that if you want to back Clemson, those are things you're looking at. And if you want to back Louisville, I don't think we have to go into and describe the reasons why you would back Louisville. Certainly Lamar Jackson and that offense has shown us early on this season. And you know what else? Their injury list is a blank, Rob. There's nobody on that Louisville team, with the exception of Jaquay Savage, who's questionable and likely will play. It's just nobody hurt on that football team. They are healthy at this point in time, and they are rolling. So it should be a very, very good football game. Obviously, the Atlantic Division of the ACC is up for grabs here.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at these two teams, and you would expect a good football game, probably coming down to the fourth quarter. I don't think there's going to be a blowout like you saw of Louisville against Florida State. I mean, it's just a situation where I don't think Louisville's going to be able to go into Death Valley on a Saturday night primetime national game with another Heisman contender on the other side of the field and do anything like they did to Florida State. I think the situation favors Clemson a little bit. Should be a very good and fun game to watch. One team that we'll be watching very, very closely is Florida State. They play in the afternoon against UNC. And, Rob, I want to go ahead and make this our make-or-break bonus game of the week. We'll talk about it. Reason being, if Florida State can get the win and Clemson can get a home win, Florida State goes back to indirectly controlling their own destiny to an extent. I mean, there's some convoluted tiebreakers way on down the line if Clemson, Louisville, and Florida State all finish with one conference loss, and none of the other tiebreakers can solve the problem. So Florida State really going to hope they win on Saturday afternoon, of course, and then they're probably rooting for Clemson on Saturday night, knowing that they will get to play Clemson at home in just a couple of weeks' time and could really kind of reset their season after the humiliating loss at Louisville just a few weeks ago. UNC coming into this game off of a last-second dramatic win against Pitt, 37-36. They didn't look great for most of the game. Pitt had the lead throughout, and then UNC found something that worked in the fourth quarter and managed to pull out a victory that didn't look likely earlier in the game. And Florida State coming in off a big rebound win against South Florida, handled them by 20. The offense looked great, 55 points, 55-35, your final there. And what was interestingly only a 5-point spread in that game, they very easily covered that number en route to a big bounce-back victory. What do you see between Florida State and UNC this Saturday?
Well, you know what? Let's start off, Rob, by going back to something that we pointed out in the Stanford-Washington game, and that's the strength of your opposition thus far. In this game, again, it's really no contest. Florida State has played Ole Miss, they played Louisville, and they've played South Florida, three teams that have shown us they're very good football teams this year. Lost to two of them, got absolutely destroyed by one of them, but the three teams, those right there, are far better than what North Carolina's faced this season, in my estimation. Two of the games they had were Illinois and James Madison, an FCS team, and a low-rung Power 5 team in Illinois, undergoing a huge change with Lovie Smith as the head coach. And in their other two opponents, I talked earlier about Georgia. I would say that Georgia is not as good as Ole Miss, Louisville, and probably on par with South Florida. And then they had Pittsburgh as well last week. So the schedule, strength of schedule has been in Florida State's favor thus far. They're the more tested team. That's not to say that North Carolina hasn't been somewhat tested, but Florida State's much more tested. And in this game, you've got mirror images, though. I'm going to take that, and this is why handicapping and sports betting is such an inexact science, because you can have the same two components in your handicap for two different games, and yet come to different conclusions. There's no blanket statements to be made. I don't know that the North Carolina strength of schedule or lesser strength of schedule will play that much of a role in this one. I think what you wind up in this game with is mirror images. And both of these teams are so similar, Rob, at this point in time. On North Carolina's side, you've got a star running back in Elijah Hood. On the other side, you've got a star running back in Dalvin Cook. On one side, you've got a rookie quarterback who's playing very well in Mitch Trubisky for North Carolina. On the other side, you've got a rookie quarterback who's playing very well in DeAndre Francois for Florida State. On North Carolina's side, you've got game-breaking perimeter weapons, Ryan Switzer and company, Bug Howard, all these guys. Florida State has game breakers on that side. The difference on offense is minimal. Both teams extremely wide open, play the same style. Defensively, they've both been poor. Florida State's a poor defense at this point in time. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I don't know that it registered with me as much as it did with some inside the Florida State camp, but the injury to defensive back Derwin James at the time was said to be near devastating. And Florida State is being thrown on and run on at this point in time pretty well. They've had some injuries across their defensive front seven, too. But James in the secondary, I'd point out as an extreme factor this week because Trubisky and the North Carolina offense can move it through the air. FSU hasn't really stopped anybody. You can flip the coin and argue me right back and say, well, who's North Carolina going to stop? Because we saw last week against Pittsburgh, a team with Nate Peterman and a weak passing offense that made some hay against North Carolina. They ran the ball on North Carolina. The 4-game averages for both of these teams are very close to being equal. I think what you get here is just a flat-out shootout. I don't know. Whichever team has the ball last probably wins the game. I think they can both move the ball up and down the field on one another as long as weather is not a factor in Tallahassee on Saturday. I have a hard time seeing either defense stop the opposing offense. Total in this game is 70. Oddsmakers obviously telling you that it's going to be a high-scoring game, but I don't know that 70 is enough. I think these two teams can make 70 look real small.
Rob, I think that will be a fun one to watch on Saturday amongst a bunch of other big games, and that will do it for our games this week. What do you want to tell our listeners here as we wind down our Week 5 early look ahead?
Yeah, first of all, we need everybody to go ahead and visit the homepage, robvenosports.com. If you're interested in this week's free play, go to the homepage. The free play this week is going to come from the ACC. It's the game between North Carolina State and Wake Forest. Also, selections. I know that all three of us, myself, Rob, yourself, and Derek have performed very well as far as NFL selections go. The college football has been good, too, for you guys. So I think you want to go ahead and get involved with the selection packages. You want to go ahead and get all the information, the gambling information, statistical stuff that we have there. It's unlike any other site, really. You won't find a lot of the gamblers-type numbers that you'll find at robvenosports.com. So very simply, I would say go ahead and visit robvenosports.com. I think you'll take away some very valuable information that will help you with your handicaps over the weekend.
Absolutely. Not only come for the plays, but if you're doing your own research to want to confirm what you get from us, you'll be able to do that. The power rankings are up there. The Rob Veno projected lines are up there. There's just so much good information to get, and it's all just a couple of clicks away. We, of course, suggest you go there and listen to all our other podcasts. I know Rob has some other ones that go up from time to time. Great knowledge in all of those as well. And late-breaking weather will be on top of all that for you this weekend. It's definitely going to be a big weekend of college football. Rob, I thank you for taking the time again this week to break down some of the biggest matchups of the weekend. And I will see you back here next week, and we'll do it all over again. Hopefully everyone will have a very profitable weekend enjoying the games. Thank you, everyone.